So one of my old 100 watt panels here, it's a bit beaten up, but it still works perfectly, apart from the fact it's had a bit of an accident, as you can see. So what I've done is I've actually lost one of the cables, and usually I could reattach that, but it's actually broken off the bottom here of the junction box itself. And the other one is also broken too. And the cover plate as well. I don't know if you can see that, but it's also lost a clip as well. So what I'm going to do is replace this. I'm going to put new wires on it as well. Might as well, since I'm doing it anyway. So I'm going to show you how I do it. So I've got the panel on the floor now. It's on an old mat here, this old orange mat that I've got here, just to protect the front a bit from being scratched up. So first off, I'm just going to remove this old cable here, because I'm not going to be using it again. I will recycle it and use it somewhere else, but not for this particular setup. So I'm just going to snip that one off first. And there we have it. So that's come out. That makes it just easier to work on here. So next thing I'm doing is just going to get a soldering iron and actually get these 3 key soldered pieces off here, which are connected directly to the solar panel, so I can start work on it itself. Soldering iron is warm now. I've got it plugged into my Explorer 240, which is just over there. It's just in case you hear the fans kick in. So let's get these tabs off of here so that we can actually remove this whole piece. And there we have it, 3 tabs off, ready to do the next piece. Right, I'm going to remove the metal now, so that it makes it easier to work when I'm taking off of the old junction box. So literally just unscrew these 3. Obviously make sure this is cool if you've just soldered or you're doing a similar repair. So let's take that out there. And that one as well. And because this isn't connected now, it should just lift out like so. So we have it, so that's out of the frame now. So I'm just going to get my tools now to actually take this off. Right, time for the difficult bit now. So I need to try and get this old junction box off, which is obviously sealed on here with sealant. So I'm going to hack away at this now and then clean it up, ready for the new one. So a quick point of note here, you just need to be careful of these tabs when you're actually trying to lever this off. Okay, as you can see, that come off reasonably easy, a bit of elbow grease on that. So I'm just going to clean up the remainder of the sealant. So that seems to be enough now, and I'll just give this a wipe round with some wipes. I've made sure that the tabs there haven't been damaged, because it's very difficult to move around this area of it. So they're in good shape. I'll give this a good wipe down, and then we can prep it ready for the new one. Right, all cleaned up now. Used a wipe and obviously dried that off now, so that's a nice clean surface ready for the new one to be attached with new sealant. As you can see, it did scratch up a little bit, but I've done it on these other panels before and it's completely fine. It's just the fact that this has got a gloss black finish, so it does come up and show every little scratch when you're taking off the old sealant. So I'm just going to make the new one up now, ready to apply. Right, now the solar panel is cleaned up and ready to take the new junction box, it's time to make the new junction box up. So I've got it here, and I'm going to actually crimp these cables inside here, and I've got the positive this side and the negative this side, and then I'll just solder the tabs from the back of the panel straight back on there, and then I'll also put the sealant around there, put that on the back of the panel and let that seal up and then dry overnight. So to do that, I'm going to make 2 new cables up. So I've got the 2 MC4 connectors here, which will go on the end of the new cables. And I couldn't actually find any 4mm square cable, which is what this junction box is really for, but it doesn't really make any difference. I've used this before, so all the difference is really compared to the old cable that's come off, which was 4mm square, is the fact that obviously there's more cable in there. So I don't know if you can see that on camera, it might be a bit difficult, but the older cable is slightly thinner than the new one. But again, I've used it on these panels before and it's worked perfectly. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to make these cables up first and put the MC4 connectors on before I actually start to make the junction box up again. Right, so the internal metal piece, as you can probably see, is slightly different on these two. So that's so they just fit in together when you actually put the connectors together. So the larger one, or what appears to be the larger barrel here, goes in the positive one here, which is marked up as positive with the red as well. But again, it depends where you're connecting your cables round. But for this particular setup and coming out of this panel, it will be the positive. And the other one over here is the thinner one here, which goes into this particular one, which is classed as a negative or marked up as a negative just on the plastic there. So let's get these connected up. So I've got my cable ready to go now. So if we just undo this particular connector here, you'll see there's an additional little bung there as well. And when this compresses down or is tightened down, this actually pinches round the cable to actually make it as weatherproof as possible. So that's out ready to go, and obviously I'm going to use this metal piece on this particular one. So I've got my crimpers out here now. So these I've got various sizes of cable that they work for. So it's 2.5mm, 4mm or 6mm. And because I'm going with 6mm on this because I couldn't find any 4mm, I need to make sure and just set it up first of all in the crimper there. So you can actually preset it up, ready to go, ready to crimp when I've put the cable in. Just makes it easier if you almost set it up first, in my experience anyway. So set it up, ready to go. So you know, almost hold it into place, and you can see that there, and just make sure it's as straight as possible so that when you crimp this in, it's ready to go. So I'm going to put that cable end in there now. So that, try and get that fitting nicely. So there's no stray cables on there. So make sure it's pushed in enough, and then just literally crimp as hard as you can. And then sometimes it sticks a bit. There you have it, a perfectly crimped cable there. So what I need to do now is just make sure that this is in the right way round. So I'm just going to slip this over the top of here. And then obviously from the other end at the moment I can just slip this back on here like so. So it's ready to go. And normally I would suggest making sure that if you're going to do this, you put this on before you actually go ahead and actually do the crimp, but I've just wanted to do that just to show you how the crimp works. So next thing you need to do is just make sure it's as straight as possible. Sometimes crimping bends it over a bit. So then you just push it in as hard as you get a click, and that's in now as far as it will go. So you can now push this little rubber bung thing up here as well. I hope that's visible on there. Sometimes it needs a little bit of coaxing in there. So now we're ready just to tighten this up. So you can pretty much tighten this up pretty much all the way, just using your fingers, but I've got some additional like wrenches that I use on this just to tighten it up. So I'm going to do that now, and then I'll do the other one. So it's rinse and repeat time now. So again, just undo this, take the little rubber bung out, and that's ready to go. So this time I'm just going to put it straight on. So obviously make sure that you get the end cap around the right way. So you slide that on like that. And also this needs to be around the right way, so you just slip that over the end there before we crimp. And this one's always a bit difficult. You just make sure you don't pull any of the wire strands over. So that's clear there, ready to go now. So again, I'm going to set this up on here. So let's just put that there for now. So again, I'm just preparing it on the 6mm square one, ready to go. Just make sure that it's in as flat as possible so I get a good crimp on there. So time to put in the cable again, and push that in as much as possible, and again just grip down hard, and then that should, as you can see, it's crimped perfectly. And again, sometimes, as I said before, it bends it over a little bit, so just bend it straight, so it just makes a better connection when you put it into the main body of the MC4 connector. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to do the same as I did with the positive one, and just until it clicks, and then you can see it in there, and just double check inside that it's actually in the right place. Put the rubber bung back in there, so that's ready to go. And I think where the other end's off, just grab the other end cap that fell off. So just slot that straight back on there. There we go, so that's back on there now. And then just do exactly the same as did before and just tighten this up. And again, I'll get the wrenches out and make sure I tighten that up fully so that's as weatherproof as possible. So there we have it. two MC4 connected cables ready to go. So I've got a couple of wrenches here. I'm just going to put it over, one goes over the top and the other one just goes on the end cap there. So just tighten those round just so that it gets tight and then remains weatherproof. So that's that one done. And it works the same in the same principle. So you just slide that over there like so, and then you just slide that on the end cap there. And again, just tighten it up. And there we go, job done. Right, so I've removed the metal inserts here from the junction box, and there are the screws there as I've done. But the only problem I've got with this is the fact that because I'm using 6mm squared cable, there's not enough room between these two pieces without having to unsolder the diodes on here. So I'm not actually going to do that. For this particular part, I'm actually going to use the 4mm square for this particular cable. It still works fine in this setup because I've used it before. But if I were to try and crimp, as it is with the 6mm square one, which is on the end of here, on the end of the ratchet crimper, I'd actually end up damaging the middle piece, which I don't really want to do, even though I'm not going to be using it. I'm just going to use the 4mm in this case. So let's just get that set up. So I'm going to insert the cables now, ready to start crimping while it's in there. So it's a similar setup with the MC4 connectors. You've got a little rubber bung there as well, which obviously goes around the cable. So that does need to go on before putting this into the junction box. So first up, I'm going to be putting in the positive cable, which goes on this side, and it's marked up, and you might not be able to see that very well, but it's marked up in the junction box so you know which way. So that's positive and negative. So I've already identified which is the positive, which is the cable ending like this. And if you're ever in doubt, you can always check the previous one, and it's got a plus on there as well. So you can see that of the previous cable, which obviously matches up what you're trying to do. So first up then, I need to make sure that I've got both the end cap on, which goes on first, and then I've got the rubber bung there again, which just goes through, and just make sure again you don't get any stray cables. So first things first is I need to push this as far through as possible, because I'm going to have to crimp with the outside of the box itself. So it gets a bit tricky, this bit, but it does work. It's worked before. So I'll just get that in, just so that we get it inside the box. And then we can obviously, once that's been crimped in, we can just pull them both back down again. So I'm just going to put that up there, so it doesn't matter because I can let that ride down there. So let's do the negative cable now. So same again, take the rubber bung out. Make sure the end cap piece is on, first of all. And then make sure that the rubber bung's the right way round again, so the little pieces there go at the bottom, so that when it's tightened up, it makes that good weatherproof seal. So let's let that ride down, and again, try and manoeuvre this so we can get it in there without any stray cables. Let's see if we can get that in there. And pull that up there like so. Again, this is the only tricky bit really of all of this. And then obviously I need to be around the same length as well, so that once they're crimped in place, because once I've crimped one, obviously I'll need to crimp the other as well. So let's get the crimping set up, ready to crimp the positive first and then the negative. Okay, I've flipped the box round now just to make it a bit easier for me. So I'm just going to get the first one set up on the 4mm square option here. So let's put that in again. This will be a bit tight, but again, I don't want to really damage the middle part of this particular connection piece inside. So again, I'll try and get it in as exactly the same as I did for the MC4 connectors, to make sure it's as flush as possible. So first one up then, we're going to put the positive in again. It's flipped round again, so make sure the cable goes in there like so. And this one I need a bit more effort, so crunch it down. And there we go, a bit more effort on that one involved. And as you can see, we've got a pretty good crimp there. And that's ready to go on that side. So I've flipped it round, as you can see, and ready to use the crimpers from this side, because obviously I want to make sure that it goes in and it works perfectly. It's in the 4mm squared, so just make sure there's no stray cables on the cable that's going into it. So let's try and slot that in there now. Hopefully that will go in fairly easily. Oh, we've got some stray cables. So again, this is probably the trickiest piece of the whole of the repair. So let's get that in there like so. And that's in there now. So let's just crimp that down, give it double hands because again it's going on a smaller cable or smaller crimp. And there we have it. So I'll straighten these up and then we can put them back in the junction box. Let's pull these down. And you need to be careful doing this. And as I said before, it's a lot easier using the smaller cables on this than using the 6mm, but like I say, I couldn't find any of those. So again, carefully pull those down without breaking anything. And then line them up. So they should fit in fairly well. Let's get those lined up, because again, I pulled them around a bit and they're only held together by the diodes really. Don't over tighten them as well on this because this is just plastic anyway. And there we have it. So perfectly crimped. We've got the positive in the right place. This is a positive here. And we've got the negative in the right place, which is the negative here. So let's just get the rubber bungs back in. Let's get that in there. So that's the first one done. And tighten it by fingers to start with. And then I'll get the little wrenches out. So second one here. Make sure that's in as tight as possible and then just screw the end cap in. And I'll find the wrenches and give them a tighten up. But that essentially is the junction box or the connection box done and dusted, ready to reseat on the solar panel. So this is the stuff I'm going to use to reattach the junction box to the back of the panel again, this EBT plus stuff. I've used it quite a few times before and it works really well on the back of the panels. I'm hoping it's not solidified so that I can still use this and I don't have to go out and get some more because I haven't got any more tubes of this. So time to get messy again. So before I put any sealant on the back of the junction box, I'm just going to make sure that I can line it up properly with where I've taken off the old one. So there are still some lines, you might not be able to see it on camera, but there's still some lines there that I can work within because I want to make sure it's on as straight and as best fit really for the tabs that are going to be resoldered. I'm not resoldering these until it's had chance to settle overnight and cure properly. So the tabs need to be upright, as you can see on here, so I can actually just feed this over the top. And then once it's over the top, I can get in my own mind whereabouts it would need to go once I've got the sealant on, obviously, because I don't really want to be smearing it around the place. And I want to make sure the tabs do line up properly so that they can be soldered back on okay. So I'm just looking around at the moment. Okay, I've got it straight in my own head and about the gap as well between the frame and the top of the junction box as well. So let's get some sealant on and get this reattached. So as I feared, the sealant did solidify in the end piece, which you apply it with. But a little tip that I've used before with this is you can just put a screw in there, screw it right in the middle of the sealant and you can just pull it straight out. Time to put it on, so I'm going to go around the edges as you can see on here. So let's not put too much on as well, but just enough so that when I push it down, it's got sufficient there to make the seal. So let's get that right around just the edges. I'm not putting it in the middle piece there, so let's just get that covered in there. Again, so this is the other part of this messy job, other than scraping the old stuff off. There we go, it looks like that's got about enough on there now, not too much, not too little. So let's spin this over now. And then just be careful of the tabs again. Just guide that in, and again going over the old marks that I can still see from the top. Just try and get that in straight. And then push it down enough so that it just starts to come round the edges again, so it makes a weatherproof seal. And the tabs are lined up nicely, and I'm not pushing too hard, otherwise it makes it too thin. But just so you get enough that comes out from the edges on the inside and the outside, so it makes a perfect seal. So it doesn't move around too much. And I think we are in I think that looks pretty good, a bit more at the bottom. And it looks fairly square against the frame as well. So I would say, let's leave that alone to set properly, and then we can do the tabs, and then we'll be good to test it. Final stage of the repair now, so just to resolder the tabs back onto the metal pieces so the solar panel will work, and then get it tested outside. So each of these little metal pieces here have this little slot in there, and a lot of the ones that I've looked at before don't tend to use them. They just tend to solder them straight back over the top. But I like just to clip them in there because it just makes it a little bit easier when it comes to soldering. So I'm just moving the first one in there. A little bit tricky, but gives it a better purchase in there. So that one's in the little slots now, ready for the soldering. So I'm going to do all three while I'm here. And again, you don't need to do this, but I do it because it makes it a little bit easier. That's two, and the third one, which is a little bit off center, but again, you can't always line these up perfectly when you're putting these back on. Let's get that in there. You just need to clip it around the edge and then bring it back within the slot. So there we go. So hoping you can see that. So we've got all three in there now, and they're all ready to be resoldered. So this bit as well, I've noticed before, is just keep the soldering iron away from the plastic edge, because you can actually do damage and then the cover plate won't fit properly, and I've actually done that before. So let's get going with the first one here. So I just apply a bit just to warm things up a bit. And don't forget to do this in a well ventilated room. I've got all the windows open at the moment. So let's get that in there, give plenty in there to make sure it's soldered properly. And let that cool. I'm going to just tap with a screwdriver just to make sure that there's no movement in those tabs. That's solid on there. So that's done. So I'm just going to put the cover plate back on. Now that's cooled down a bit. And that's clipped into place. I felt around the edge. It's nicely in place and it's ready for testing. Right, quick check to see that we've got voltage now. So they're both connected there, as you can see. And we're getting in 22.2 volts. So let's hook up something and see if we can charge it. Right, I've connected the panel's MC4 connectors up to one of these cables here, which goes all the way around into my Jackery Explorer 1000. So let's see what we're getting. It's late in the afternoon now, so I'm not sure. I'm hoping you can see that. We're getting just over 90 watts. So in not perfect conditions, I think that's a really successful test and repair.